A family gathers in a luxury apartment to celebrate a father's birthday. Hours later, the son is dead, shot in front of his wife and children by his own father. But this was no sudden outburst. Police would soon uncover homemade guns, 15 explosives, and a plan that could have ended in mass tragedy. This is the chilling true story of a man who turned a family celebration into a calculated act of terror. Let's begin. July 20th, 2025, 9:31 p.m. Night had fallen over the quiet city. In Songdo, Incheon, South Korea, one of Incheon's most upscale residential districts, warm laughter echoed through the halls of a high-rise apartment complex. Inside, the family had gathered to celebrate a birthday, the patriarchs. It was a familiar, intimate evening filled with smiles, clinking glasses, and conversations about the future. Friends and loved ones shared wine and homemade food, basking in the comfort of family. But that peace was shattered in an instant. A sudden, piercing crack echoed through the building. Gunfire. Moments later, a woman's voice came through the emergency dispatch, breathless, trembling, and desperate. "My father-in-law shot my husband. Please, hurry." The call left officers momentarily stunned. When police and paramedics rushed to the scene, what they found inside the apartment was a nightmare. A man lay crumpled on the floor in a pool of blood, his body riddled with gunshot wounds. Not far from him were two firearms and metal pellets, black and unmistakably homemade. It was a murder involving an improvised firearm in South Korea, a country with some of the strictest gun laws in the world. It was the first such case in nearly a decade. And more shocking still, the gunman wasn't a stranger. It was the victim's own father. Why would a man open fire on his son at his own birthday party? What could have driven a 66-year-old man to prepare such a cold-blooded act? Was this a moment of madness or the end of a plan long in the making? Let's go back to where it all began. At a glance, the Cho family looked like they had done well for themselves. The ex-wife had built a name for herself. She was the CEO of Yaksun House, a well-known aesthetics company in South Korea with branches overseas. She'd spent decades growing the business from the ground up, and by now, she was regarded as a successful entrepreneur and a public figure. Their son, now in his early 30s, seemed to follow a similar path. He was stable, responsible, and raising a young family of his own. A wife, two small children, and what appeared to be a peaceful domestic life. He was the type of person who remembered birthdays, stayed in touch with his parents, and made an effort to keep the family connected, even after his parents' divorce. And then there was Mr. Cho, the father. He'd been divorced from his wife for over 25 years. He resided in a spacious 70평, which is roughly 2,500 square foot luxury apartment in Seoul's affluent Dobong district. But even that home was legally owned by his ex-wife. For years, he received monthly living expenses from the family, around 3 million won, even though he wasn't employed and hadn't been for quite some time. To the family, this support was just part of their responsibility. The son and ex-wife both made sure Cho had a roof over his head, food on the table, and financial stability. It wasn't a warm or deeply close relationship, but it was consistent. There were birthday calls, visits, and regular contact. But in early 2024, that support stopped. Why exactly the payments ended isn't clear. The family has said it wasn't about cutting ties. They just couldn't continue the same level of support. But to Cho, it felt personal, like he was being pushed out of their lives. From that point on, things seemed to shift. Cho became more isolated. He reportedly began spending long hours alone at home. And according to investigators, this is when he started looking up videos on how to build weapons, watching YouTube tutorials on pipe guns and DIY explosives. But he already had a violent streak that ran deep, so much so that years ago, he even collected bullets. It was subtle, under the radar, but he was preparing. And all the while, on the surface, life went on. So when the son invited his father to celebrate his birthday in Songdo on July 20th, it seemed like a kind gesture, a way to stay connected. He brought the family together, his wife, the kids, a family friend, and his father. No one knew what Cho had been planning. They just saw him as an aging man, a bit stubborn maybe, but still part of the family. What they didn't see was the resentment he'd been carrying. The way he saw their success as a reminder of his own failures. The way he quietly blamed them for everything he no longer had. And in that apartment, with food on the table and children running through the room, Cho smiled, sat with them, and waited. This wasn't a sudden break. It wasn't a heat-of-the-moment outburst. It was something he'd been building toward slowly, quietly for months, maybe years. That night was supposed to be no different. The family later told police that the atmosphere that day had been warm and cheerful. There had been photos, birthday songs, and laughter around the table. Until the father stood up from his seat near the end of dinner and casually said, "I'm just going to step out to the convenience store for a bit." No one suspected anything. But instead of heading straight back, he stayed inside his car for 30 to 40 minutes. His son even called to ask why he wasn't coming in yet. When he finally returned, he rang the doorbell. His son opened the door for him. And then, without a word, the father raised a long black metallic object, a homemade gun. 2 shots rang out. Panic erupted. His son clutched his chest and collapsed. Blood spilled across the pristine floor. His wife and children screamed in terror. The peaceful dinner table, now a crime scene. A 3rd shot followed, this one aimed not at a person but at a door inside the apartment, as if to warn anyone who dared move. Right after shooting his son, he also reportedly turned toward his daughter-in-law and young grandchildren, saying he would kill them too. He even aimed the gun at one of his son's friends, but this time the weapon misfired. By 10:43 p.m., the police tactical unit and emergency responders arrived, but the gunman was already gone, fleeing the scene in his car heading towards Seoul. All that remained were 2 illegal firearms and a son bleeding out on the floor. He was rushed to the hospital at 11:09 p.m., but it was already too late. That night, what began as a family gathering, a birthday celebration in an affluent home, ended in horror. A father pulled the trigger, a son died in front of his children, and a family's life changed forever. In a country where guns are illegal, that scene was almost surreal. A shooting inside a luxury apartment, a man dead, and beside him 2 homemade firearms. The weapons were crude but deadly. Later, police confirmed that the shotgun-style weapon had been crafted from a metal pipe. In the suspect's car, they found 9 additional barrels. At his home, another 5 to 6 metal pipes. The exact model of the ammunition remains unreported. The suspect had already fled the scene, but there was no time to waste. Investigators quickly cordoned off the building and launched a full-scale manhunt. Security footage helped trace his route heading north towards Seoul. Roads were sealed, tactical teams mobilized, and the entire apartment complex swarmed with flashing lights, leaving shaken residents glued to their screens as the incident spread rapidly across social media. Then a break. Traffic cameras picked up the suspect's car in Seoul's Pangbudong district. At exactly 12:18 a.m., just over 2 hours after the shooting, police moved in and apprehended the man without resistance. But what came next was even more terrifying. During the initial questioning, the suspect dropped a bombshell. "I have set an explosive in my apartment in Dobonggu. It's on a timer." Immediately, the stakes changed. Police scrambled bomb squads to the suspect's home in Sangmun-dong. At 2 a.m., loudspeakers echoed through the neighborhood, ordering residents to evacuate. It was complete chaos. 105 people were forced out of their beds in the dead of night. The alleged detonation time was noon, July 21st. Inside the apartment, police discovered a setup that sent chills down their spines. 15 makeshift explosives rigged with timers and ignition devices, composed of plastic bottles filled with thinner, detergent, and milk cartons, all wired together with startling precision. A disaster had been narrowly avoided. This man not only planned to kill his own son, he tried to kill everyone in the building. Had the timer gone off in a residential building, the death toll could have been catastrophic. At first, the motive was unclear. Why would a father, pull a gun on his own son in front of his grandchildren? What kind of hatred fuels a person to prepare homemade bombs and firearms? As investigators dug deeper into Cho's background, a disturbing picture began to emerge. This wasn't a sudden break. It was years in the making. Cho had a known fixation, even a sickness, for weapons. Inside his home, police recovered 9 homemade firearms. They also found 15 bombs, each constructed with careful detail. It turns out he had spent months learning how to make them, not through military contacts or underground dealers, but through YouTube. He had studied, tested, and refined his methods alone. And his past was even darker. In December 1998, at a video rental shop he ran, Cho threatened a woman with a hiking knife and handcuffs, telling her he would kill her before committing a sexual assault. In 1999, the court sentenced him to 3 years and 6 months in prison for rape and injury. But in June that same year, on appeal, his sentence was reduced to 2 years and 6 months, with 4 years probation after the court accepted his claim of diminished capacity due to intoxication. And this happened just 1 year before he divorced his first wife. Even back then, there had been warnings, a violent streak, an unpredictable temper, and no regard for consequences. Now, all those red flags had turned into something deadly. The victim's family told investigators the shooting may not have been limited to the son. Cho had reportedly aimed his gun at his daughter-in-law and grandchildren as well. When the weapon jammed, he tried to reload, chasing them through the apartment, determined to finish what he had started. It was only thanks to a locked bedroom door and a faulty firearm that the rest of the family survived. But perhaps the most disturbing revelation was that he chose his birthday for this. The one day his entire family would be gathered, unguarded, vulnerable. When profilers questioned Cho, he showed no remorse, only bitterness. He claimed he had been financially abandoned by his son and ex-wife. They were the only family I had left, he said, and they turned their backs on me. That resentment festered. But the irony is, Cho had been living comfortably even after the divorce, thanks in large part to his family's financial support. He hadn't worked in years, and yet, in every police interview, Cho repeated the same line. "I've always been a good man. I've always lived an honest life." To investigators, those words were telling. They pointed to a man desperate to protect a fragile self-image. Behind those words, experts saw a deep-seated inferiority, resentment, and a festering victim mentality. According to Cho, his world had shrunk. No job, no friends, no place in the family he once belonged to. He felt abandoned. But the victim's family paints a very different picture. In a public statement, the son's widow firmly denied Cho's claims of neglect. "My husband always made time for his father, even celebrating his birthday with him every year. We stayed in touch, supported him emotionally, and yes, financially too. Ending that support wasn't about cutting him off. There was a reason, but never an intention to end the relationship." So what happened? Was Cho's rage truly about money, or something deeper, something far more personal? Criminal psychologists believe this case reveals more than a family dispute. They see it as a product of long-standing, buried emotional dysfunction. Cho's ex-wife represented everything he no longer had: wealth, reputation, and power. And his son, the living embodiment of that legacy. Young, accomplished, and loved, he was known to be the pride of his mother. She adored him, and her grandchildren were her entire world. To a man drowning in resentment, one expert noted, his son wasn't just a person. He was a symbol of everything Cho believed had been stolen from him. And so, by murdering his son, Cho may have been enacting a twisted revenge, not on the son himself, but on the ex-wife, who, in his mind, had succeeded without him and left him behind. While Cho insisted his motive was rooted in financial hardship, officers were skeptical. "You don't build bombs or guns over months just because you're broke," said one investigator. "You don't shoot your son in front of his children unless something much darker is driving you." Authorities are now weighing additional charges. Cho aimed his weapon at not just his son, but also his daughter-in-law, grandchildren, and even a family friend, suggesting premeditated intent to harm everyone present. Investigators are actively reviewing possible counts of attempted murder and premeditated mass violence. As the public wrestles with the horror of what happened, people started asking, how was this even possible in the first place? This case was more than a family tragedy. To Koreans, it was an alarming incident which shattered our beliefs that we were safe from firearms. In a country where firearms are strictly banned, one man was able to construct deadly weapons after studying online tutorials, many of them freely available on public platforms like YouTube. The suspect didn't stumble upon this knowledge in secret forums. He learned how to build and use guns and explosives with just a few clicks. In the aftermath, lawmakers scrambled to propose legislation regulating the online spread of bomb and weapon-making instructions. But after all, this was an effort that only came after a life had already been taken. This case also shined a spotlight on a strange gap in South Korea's criminal law. Right now, if a child kills a parent, it's considered a special kind of crime, parricide, and the punishment is automatically heavier than a normal murder. But if a parent kills their child, even on purpose, there is no matching filicide law. It's just treated like any other murder. So here, if the son had killed the father instead, the charge would have been more serious under the law. Critics say this difference is outdated, a leftover from Confucian tradition that places a special weight on filial duty toward parents. In most other countries, there's no such distinction. Some, like France and Italy, even give heavier sentences for both killing a parent and killing a child. Japan used to have a law like Korea's, but they scrapped it years ago for being unconstitutional. Experts warn this leaves a legal loophole. An adult parent who murders their adult child can only be charged with regular murder, no matter how brutal the crime. Some say the solution is to get rid of the parricide law entirely so the punishment is the same for everyone, and let judges decide the sentence based on the details of the case. Now, the suspect remains silent, even refusing to attend his arrest warrant hearing. The family, fearing further harm and public backlash, has requested that his identity not be publicly disclosed. The victim's children are still suffering from severe trauma. And the full truth behind the suspect's motives remains obscured. So, what do you think? What goes through the mind of a man who aims a gun at his own son? What could possess someone to kill in front of the very family who came only to show love? What would have happened if those 15 explosives had actually detonated? To the grieving family, and especially to the children who must carry this trauma, we offer our sincerest condolences. No words can undo what happened. But we can and must demand that this loss leads to something more than temporary outrage. That is all for today. Thanks for watching.